This is episode 90, which is how to cope with challenging dementia behaviors. And this is part 3 of a 3-part series that we've been going over the last couple of episodes related to a presentation that I did to executive leaders at a skilled nursing facility, where we looked at 3 mistakes that people typically make in dementia caregiving. The first one was not grasping how dementia has a fairly predictable path and shared root causes for behaviors. And then mistake number 2 was not empowering people to speak dementia. And then mistake number 3 was overlooking the evidence-based problem-solving solutions to actually help decrease challenging behaviors. So if you have not listened to the first 2 parts of this episode, listen to episode number 3, part 3, but go back and listen to the other episodes. They're jam-packed full of value. The first one's titled How to Understand the Changes. The second one is How to Communicate with a Person. And the third one is How to Cope with Challenging Behaviors. So thank you for listening to today's episode, and let's have a good day. And there we go. Hey there, success seeker. Welcome to Dementia Caregiving for Families. Do you feel overwhelmed with the daily struggle of dementia caregiving? Looking for an easier path? You're in the right place. On this podcast, we teach you the skills to simplify caregiving. We unravel the mystery of dementia and guide you through the often difficult behaviors. I'm Lizette, your host and fellow family caregiver. As an occupational therapist, I bring my professional and personal experience to this community. Here we speak the truth, but without the verbal vomit. I know you will find value in today's program, so buckle up while this flight takes off. For today, we are going to talk about how to cope with quote-unquote challenging dementia behaviors. This is part 3 of a 3-part series that I have done over the last couple of weeks related to an opportunity that I saw to do a little bit of a deep dive after I did a presentation to executive leadership at a skilled nursing facility, where the presentation was to look at the three big mistakes we make in dementia caregiving. The first one is not grasping that dementia follows a fairly predictable path with shared root causes for behavior. The second episode was where we looked at not empowering people to speak dementia or communicating well with people living with dementia. In today's episode, we're going to look at the third mistake that I see frequently, and that is overlooking the benefits of evidence-based and problem-solving solutions to actually decreasing a person living with dementia's challenging behaviors. So the reason I started this 3-part series was because of that presentation for executive leadership, and in seeing the responses of people who are highly qualified and highly skilled in this caregiving space, working with multiple people and their family caregivers related to dementia and dementia caregiving in a skilled nursing facility. And so I recognized the fact that many people, if the administrators and directors of nurses in a facility do not know this information and therefore cannot act upon this information, then certainly you, as a family caregiver of a person living with dementia, do not have the information or the tools that will actually make your journey easier for you. So if you didn't listen to episode 87, the one on how to understand the changes of Alzheimer's and dementia, please go listen to that. That was the part 1. And then part 2 was episode 89, which is how to communicate well in dementia caregiving. And today's episode is episode 90, and how to cope with challenging dementia behaviors. This is part 3 of 3. So I am super excited to be here and talk about this, because to me, one of the biggest frustrating parts of being in this caregiving space is how frequently I hear people saying that they are stressed or they are overwhelmed and they don't know what to do about dementia and dementia care, and that it is extremely difficult, and that it can, it's one of the worst things that can ever happen to a person, and just a lot of negativity related to caregiving. And part of my mission is to work on changing people's mindset related to being a caregiver and a dementia care partner, as well as changing the narrative out in the greater community about dementia and dementia caregiving, because it is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. I know it's not an easy process, but I know many of you might be Christians if you're listening to this, because I obviously have it in my show description that I answer all my questions from a biblical perspective, a biblical and reformed perspective. But it's not an overtly Christian podcast. However, having said that, we are all created in the image of God. And if you understand some basic principles that are taught in the Bible, there's a principle called the providence of God, which in essence just means that God is God and He's in control, and all things that happen have a purpose, have a plan, and it's for our good and for His glory that certain things happen, whether that be the death of a child, whether that be a massive stroke at 42 like my mom, whether that be my going to boarding school and all of the emotions and things that I had to work through about feeling and a sense of abandonment. When you understand the providence of God, and you understand the providence of God related to that all things happen for your good and for God's glory, then it becomes easier for you to understand and accept that even though a person you love is going through this tremendously difficult and oftentimes challenging journey, it is for their good, and it is also for your good as the family caregiver. And that helps us to reframe what it is that how we respond to it. Because if you understand that, then it makes it so much easier to not have that sense of it's the worst thing that ever has happened. To be quite frank, the worst thing that can ever happen is that a person is not a believer in Jesus Christ and ends up not being able to go to heaven and be with Him for eternity. That to me is worse than watching somebody go through a dementia process, even though that is certainly not a cakewalk. And I'm never going to say that it is super easy, but when you frame your reference, if you have that mindset and if you have that framework that you're coming from, it certainly makes this process significantly easier. So how are we going to talk today about coping with challenging dementia behaviors? I am going to briefly give you this as something to consider. We overlook as society, because everybody out in the greater world is talking about a lot of the doom and gloom and woe is me. We're not necessarily looking at the evidence-based solutions and problem-solving solutions that are available to actually decrease challenging behaviors. And if you decrease challenging behaviors, you can help to decrease the caregiver's burden and the caregiver's stressors. Did you know that caring for a person with dementia doesn't have to be this hard? If you are struggling and you would like to join our next free workshop, the topic of the workshop is 3 tips how to avoid challenging dementia behaviors without stress, anxiety, or burnout. I invite you to walk away with science-backed dementia caregiving skills that many professionals don't even know after attending this free workshop. If you'd like to register, message me the word workshop on Instagram or check out the link in the show notes below. And it was very interesting to me when I did this presentation. I actually asked the group, and there were about 50 administrators and DONs in the room. Well, maybe not quite that many, but I asked, do you guys know that there is evidence-based practice or science-backed strategies for decreasing challenging behaviors? And of the entire room, there was only one administrator who said yes. He had heard that there are, but he didn't know what they were. So if the administrators of facilities, if the DONs of facilities don't understand evidence-based practices to actually help decrease challenging behaviors, certainly family caregivers don't either. And I would contend your family practice doctor doesn't know that there are evidence-based solutions to helping you decrease somebody that you love's challenging behaviors. So let me unpack what I developed. And this is, I kind of teased this a couple of weeks ago when I said you need to join my free workshop, which I want you to come to the free workshop because I'll go into this a little bit more in depth. And the link to register to the free workshop, which is titled 3 Tips to Manage Challenging Behaviors. If you register for that workshop, I will go into these a little bit more in depth, but today we're going to do the helicopter view. And I developed this based off of several different frameworks and evidence-based practices and skills that I have learned over 30 years of being an occupational therapist. And I just repackaged it. I just put it in a different way in order to make it easier for people to understand. Because if it's not grassroots easy, if it's not fall out of a tree easy, then nobody's going to do it, right? So if it's not super, super simple and a super simple way for a person to look at the problem, then you're never going to be able to figure it out on your own. And if you can't figure it out on your own, you're never going to learn how to effectively communicate and speak dementia. And you're never going to actually be able to put together all of the pieces of the 3-part series that I've talked about, the retrogenesis, the ability to speak dementia, and then how to cope with challenging behaviors. So it's a 4-piece process. It's actually five steps or 5 letters, and it spells out the word peace. So I call it the dementia peace framework because it's super easy to have a more peaceful dementia caregiving process when you put all of these pieces together. So in a nutshell, what does the P stand for? The person living with dementia. We always start there. In the previous episode where we were talking about how to communicate well, I talked about a person's life story. If you understand where they're coming from, what their history is, how they grew up, where they grew up, all of those kinds of things, it can help you to communicate more effectively with the person, because most challenging behaviors is a person's way of trying to communicate something with you, right? So the first one is you start with the person, but we're going to go a step deeper than that. We start with the basic needs of the person. Why do we start there? Because especially later on in the dementia caregiving process, when a person is definitely needing more assistance and is not able to speak as much, they may not be able to tell you, I have pain. They may not be able to tell you, I'm constipated. I haven't gone to the bathroom. They may not be able to tell you things like, it's burning when I pee, all of those things. So you start with the person. What is going on with them? You have to turn yourself into a dementia detective. Are they cold? It's cool inside the house and they don't have a sweater on. Are they cold? Are they hot? Are they thirsty? Are they hungry? All of the basic kinds of things that a person would need to have. Do they need to go to the bathroom? Are they just tired? What is going on with the person? So that is the P in the peace framework, in the dementia peace framework. The second one is E. Now, E stands for environment. And at the end of this, I'm going to give you guys a case study that's an actual person that I worked with that mostly puts into place all of these. It doesn't have necessarily all of the components, but not every single time will it have all of these components. But if you run through the PEACE framework every single time, you'll be able to figure out what's going on. So the second one is the environment. What's going on in the environment? A person living with dementia loses the ability over time to filter out background noise. So for example, yesterday, because I'm recording this the day after I did the presentation, as I was doing the presentation and I'm standing in front of this group of assisted living and not assisted living, skilled nursing facility directors and executive leadership, I'm trying to do my presentation. And the entire time I'm doing my presentation, there were people standing on the other side of the room talking. And for me, I was still able to filter out that noise and put it aside and say, I can ignore it. But say a person living with dementia, they may not be able to do that. So let me give you a more practical example of that. For example, the person living with dementia is you're trying to talk to them and tell them something very specific that you really need them to know or understand. But at the same time, the television is on in the background and it is making a noise. And maybe the person that you're talking to is not able to filter out that noise anymore. And so it looks like they're not listening to you, but it's because the environment is such that they cannot pay attention to you. So that could be related to like a family gathering. Even though the person wants to be there and wants to be around everybody, maybe you notice they start to get wound up around certain times of day related to activity going on in the environment. So the environment can play a significant role in a person living with dementia. If it's too hot, if it's too cold, if it's too cluttered, if it's too noisy, if it's too quiet, it can be anything. So your job is to look at what's going on in the environment and not from your perspective, but step back and look at it critically look at it from the outside and see whether or not there's something that's going on that you could actually change in the environment to make it easier for the person that you're helping. So that's PEA, stands for activity engagement. Frequently throughout career as an occupational therapist, I have heard these words said to me over and over and go, my husband doesn't want to do XYZ anymore. My husband doesn't participate in, leisure activities. My husband doesn't want to, my wife doesn't want to, etc. Activity engagement is one of those things that can be very difficult to put your finger on in this regard. I want you to ask yourself a question. Over the last 24 hours, think of all of the different types of activities that you did that you found enjoyment from. Walking outside, for me, looking at my chickens, making a good meal, eating a good meal, watching a movie, reading a book, playing with the kids, petting the cat, right? All of these types of activities are daily activities that we do and we don't even think about. Now, I want you to consider that you're now at a point in your life and you cannot do it by yourself anymore. And nobody's helping you to do it. How do you feel? Does that make you feel frustrated? Does it make you feel sad that you get told all of a sudden you can't do any of those things ever again? Because I know for me, I would be very sad. One of my favorite activities to do is go outside and watch my chickens. And I get such peace from it. And so, activity engagement is one of those things that if you don't understand, and I'm going to tie it back to retrogenesis, that a person living with dementia gets to a point in their journey where they lose the ability to actually initiate doing something by themselves. They don't necessarily lose the desire to do the thing. They just lose the ability to initiate to do the thing. And if somebody walks with them and facilitates them to do an activity, they're likely still able to participate. But it looks like they don't want to engage in an activity, but it's not that they don't want to, it's just that they cannot by themselves anymore. And so a person, when you look at this piece framework, when you're thinking through activity engagement, it typically is one of two extremes. It's the person is either way overstimulated or the person is way understimulated. And so both of those, so they're bored out of their skull, right? Or they're like wired for sound. And so if you look at activities, in activities, I'm not talking about doing a craft or going and making a piece of artwork, even though those are activities. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the day-to-day things, the fabric of our life, that we're constantly doing things. We are made to do. People are made to communicate, and people are made to do, and we do things together. So keep in mind when you're looking at a problem, whether or not the person might be overstimulated or understimulated. Overstimulated goes back to the environment, so they all work together, right? So then the fourth one of the C's, PEAC, is care companion. Now, why are you as the care companion important? Because a person living with dementia, as they progress through this process, and when we look at retrogenesis too, as their brain is changing, they lose the ability to control their own emotions. If you think about a younger person as they're developing, children are still developing the ability to control their own emotions, right? Well, a person living with dementia, as they're going through this process, they start to change in terms of their ability to control their own emotions. This happens reasonably early on, which is why a lot of times we see a person living with dementia being frustrated or crying or angry because they're not able to control their own emotions. But the flip side of that whole conversation is, because they cannot control their own emotions, what they do is they take on the energy of the people around them. So I call it being a sponge. They turn into an emotional sponge. So they will suck up the energy that you are putting out. Did you know that caring for a person with dementia doesn't have to be this hard? If you are struggling and you would like to join our next free workshop, the topic of the workshop is 3 tips how to avoid challenging dementia behaviors without stress, anxiety, or burnout. I invite you to walk away with science-backed dementia caregiving skills that many professionals don't even know after attending this free workshop. If you'd like to register, message me the word workshop on Instagram or check out the link in the show notes below. So back to my dad and the whole conversation that I had last episode about me and him and the car. When I would go into the house with my dad and I was wound up and frustrated because I knew before I'd go in that we were going to get into an argument. Like if I came from that perspective, every single time we had an argument, every single time. But if I sat in the car before I got out of the car and I said to myself, your dad's going to push your buttons. Don't let him. And I put it in the forefront of my head that I knew that he was upset because of the car, but that I could not respond in like fashion. Then I was able to diffuse the situation, because a person living with dementia will take on the energy of the person who is helping them. So if you come in to help somebody who is living with dementia and you're anxious, they're anxious. If you're sad, they're sad. If you are happy and upbeat, they are happy and upbeat. So they will take on the emotional energy that you put out. So when a person living with dementia is exhibiting a challenging behavior, and it's not one of these other things, then you got to ask yourself, what am I doing to contribute to this thing that I'm seeing happen? How did I actually either facilitate or do something or say something inadvertently to cause what it is that I'm seeing? The person is not doing this on purpose. If they had any control over this, they wouldn't be doing it in this way, right? They're not doing it on purpose. They are not purposefully setting out to annoy you or to frustrate you or to make you angry. They are going through a process where their brain is changing. There are real, actual physical reasons for them to do the things that they are doing. We just don't necessarily understand that if we haven't really talked about it. So, person, environment, activity, participation, or engagement, what the care companion contributes to it, and then you evaluate. That's the E. You evaluate what's going on. If there are other people around that need to know, you educate them about what you've learned, and you work through this process every single time. You run it through this framework every single time, and it will make it easier for you to see what's going on, and this will also contribute into making it easier to communicate with the person. So let me give you a concrete example of this, and I'm going to try to pull in a couple of different things that all happened in the same situation. I was working with a gentleman many, many years ago in very rural South Carolina. And it was one of these situations where mom and dad lived in this house, and then there were little pockets of people living around. And all the kids lived around, and the grandkids, and everybody kind of lived on the same property or within a couple of blocks of one another. And dad had probably what I would say was never diagnosed with it specifically, but I would guess that he had Lewy body dementia with Parkinson's type symptoms. I came to their house and I was doing an evaluation. And the entire time that I'm doing this evaluation, in the back of my mind, it's, going through, I'm like, I'm not going to make it out of here. I'm not going to make it out of here. This is driving me nuts. And I was asking questions about what kind of struggles they were having as a family. Mom and dad were sleeping in the living room. Dad slept in a recliner right under a ceiling fan. And as I'm doing my whole thing, there are like 7 or 8 family members all sitting around watching me. Everybody's talking. And the entire time, dad is going, sit to stand, 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 repetitively, sit to stand, sit to stand. So that's the picture I want you to have in the back of your head. This is what I was facing. This is what I was seeing. But it was very evident to me as I was talking to the family that they were super keen to learn a way to help, and they wanted to help their dad. So I taught them this framework. I taught them this peace framework. I didn't do it in this specific way, but I started by telling the family, I said to the daughter at the end of the conversation, I said to her, I'm like, if you want to significantly change your dad's sit to stand behaviors today, you need to go out and you need to replace the ceiling fan. And everybody kind of looked up at the ceiling fan and looked back down at me and said, oh, we never noticed that. And so the entire time I'm sitting there, I'm not used to this. And so my brain's like, I can't stand this. But the ceiling fan was unbalanced and was going thwop, 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 thwop every second, every time it went around. And what had happened is nobody had noticed this over time. Well, the gentleman was sleeping right underneath it. So I want you to put together what I said about the inability to tune out background noise related to the environment. So he's sleeping in this environment with the ceiling fan going thwop, thwop, thwop. And he's trying to get up and get away. And everybody's yelling at him, Daddy, sit down, Daddy, sit down, Daddy, sit down. So this is going on the whole entire time. It was very busy in the house, lots of visitors coming through all the time. One of the other things that they told me related to him was that at 3:00 in the afternoon, every afternoon, he would get super angry and agitated. And so my question was, what happens at 3:00 in the afternoon? And everybody stopped and thought, and they're like, oh, his grandson comes home from school and comes through the front door, drops his bag, is a normal 9-year-old boy, running, loves his grandpa, throws his arms around him, lots of activity going around, and, runs out, goes to the kitchen, gets a snack. And immediately afterwards, dad's wound up, right? So there's another environmental thing going on related to this gentleman, right? Then there was mentioned by his wife that he was reluctant to have her help him transfer. And I never had trouble transferring him. I could get him to transfer. His granddaughter could get him to, a grandson could get him to transfer. His daughter could get him to transfer. But whenever she tried to get him to transfer, he would pull back on it. Well, when you'd look at them standing next to one another, he was 6 foot something and she was 4 foot nothing. And there was a huge height disparity. And somewhere in him, I believe he thought he was going to hurt her. So he would resist, he would pull back and not let her help him. But if you didn't stand back and look at it critically, it could just look like he is being resistant to receiving care from her. He was probably scared she was going to drop him, and he couldn't tell her that he was scared she was going to drop him. So that's how the care companion contributed to the whole situation. So back to the ceiling fan. So the ceiling fan actually they went out, they bought one, they replaced it, and his sit-to-stand behaviors had significantly decreased, probably by about 75%. But there was a little piece to this puzzle, because it's like putting together a puzzle, that I didn't know yet. And he was readmitted to the hospital because he wasn't able to urinate. He was having a hard time urinating. And when he was in the hospital, they actually put a catheter in. And so when he came back home from the hospital, that sit-to-stand behavior totally stopped. Totally. It was gone. There was no sit-to-stand behavior ever again. And so between the person, what was happening with him, and he couldn't tell us this, he couldn't empty his bladder and it hurt. So he was trying to stand up to go to the bathroom, or he was trying to stand up because the ceiling fan was driving him nuts. And when they put the catheter in and his bladder could empty, he never ever did that behavior again. So that was what was going on with him. The person, we talked about the fan, the environment, we talked about the grandson, the environment. We talked about activity engagement. There was a lot of people coming a lot of the period throughout the day, which could be either overstimulated or sometimes maybe there was nothing going on, understimulated. And then the care companion, what was going on with his response to his wife in trying to have him transfer with her, where he couldn't communicate what was going on and why he was reluctant. So when you follow this piece framework, person, environment, activity engagement, care companion, and you evaluate it and you look at it critically, and you just write stuff down, and then you problem solve and you try something. And if it doesn't work, you try something else. And if it doesn't work, you try something else. It's one of those things, because I've been doing it for so long, I make it look super easy because I've had more experience doing it. But it is possible for you to figure out how to do this yourself. It absolutely is possible for you to cope with challenging behaviors by just following an evidence-based, problem-solving, solution-based approach to challenging behaviors. And so my ask for you today is that I know that this was jam-packed, full of value, because this is the one thing that everybody is now telling me. It's like, oh, you make this sound so super, super easy. It can be. But my ask for you today, take one of these truly valuable pieces of information and try something. Write it down. If it doesn't work, try something else again. Just keep trying, but keep track of what you're trying and run it through this filter. What's possibly going on with the person in the environment, in the activities, in their response to the people around them, the care companion. Evaluate it, evaluate it, evaluate it. And as you repetitively do this, it will get easier. And I promise that you can do this. You can learn to speak dementia. It is absolutely possible, or else I would not have been able to learn how to speak dementia. Other people would not have been able to learn how to speak dementia. So this is my encouragement to you. You can. It's definitely easier having a framework to be able to do this. And this is a very, very easy, repeatable framework. But if you're ready for a little bit more help, and until the end of March 31st this year, which is a Sunday, so probably the Saturday, I'm still doing my Founding 54 Family Special, which includes, if you join right now in the Founding 54 period, you will get lifelong access to the coaching component, where you have me and other coaches over time to help you problem solve some of the things that you might not be able to do by yourself. We start with where you are. We start with how your stress levels are. We start with where the person that you're helping is. So I help you with the actual using a questionnaire to be able to nail down exactly where they are, which means you'll know what's coming next. Then within the first 90 days, we get through the process of capacity to care, which is the whole entire module of this dementia piece process, where we actually go into what it is, what are challenging behaviors, how they work, exactly what types of ones are there, what might be contributing to those kinds of things. And during the coaching calls every week, you have the opportunity to actually bring your questions to me, to have me work through it with you and listen to other people's questions. Because what a lot of my community members tell me, it's being on the calls, listening to other people's questions that help them be able to figure it out on their own. A lot of the people have told me, like I mentioned last week, one of my current clients said that she now hears me in her head, which could be a bad thing, but she hears me in her head when she's trying to figure out what's going on with her mom, which means she is now internalizing it and is able to actually start to do this independently for herself, which is the purpose of these coaching calls, is to teach you. And then after that, there are a couple more other steps that we go through in this process. But if you join as a Founding 54 member for a one-time investment for the lifetime of the person that you're joining for, so if you join for one person, it's for that person. For the person that you're joining for, lifetime access of that person to the coaching component. That is a priceless gift that I'm giving you, because my goal is to serve. My goal is to serve deeply. My goal is to serve to the point that I truly know who the people in the community are. And then we do this in a community component where you have support from other people living with dementia, who are the family caregivers, person living with dementia. So if I resonate with you, please email me at Lizette@thinkdifferentdementia.com. I am not here to have people join this program if they're not the right fit. Right now, I'm still meeting with people. We can hop on a phone call. We can do a Zoom call, see if you're appropriate for this. If so, please reach out. The Founding 54 members stops at March 31st, and whoever has joined at that time will have lifetime access. There's some other bonuses and things included, but I'm not going to get into it here. So if I resonate with you, I invite you to come and join this Founding 54. Send me an email and we can go from there. So this was part 3 of a 3-part series. The first episode was how to understand the changes of Alzheimer's and dementia, where we looked at retrogenesis and staging of dementia. Episode 89 was how to communicate well with people living with dementia and learning how to speak dementia. And today's episode was how to cope with challenging behaviors, by giving you a repeatable, evidence-based framework for you to be able to learn how to look at this and come up with a problem-solving approach for you to be able to figure out how to decrease some of the behaviors that you see. So thank you for listening to today's episode. As always, if I resonate with you, please share this episode with somebody else. People living with dementia are all over, and their family members are not asking for help. So if you know somebody, give them this podcast, ask them to listen to an episode or two, and share this and like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining me today, Success Seeker. I pour my heart and soul into this program to serve you. You can serve me by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, and join our free Facebook group Dementia Caregiving for Families. It's a positive and proactive space to navigate dementia caregiving together. Get practical tools and find support, but without the verbal vomit. Be a part of our community where we seek to find peace of mind and ease despite the dementia diagnosis. So join today and see you next time as our flight takes off.